Often when people talk about building projects or we've got to do something with our facility, the dollar signs like kind of deer in headlights. You have that moment when really it doesn't have to be expensive to move the needle and even to communicate to the community like, hey, something's different here and we're for you. You know, that scarcity mentality really prevents people from taking the kind of risks that they need to take to really reach the community. The kind of risk that Christ took on the cross. You know, that's a big risk.
Today on The Glass House, we're welcoming Dave Milam to talk about a subject we're both passionate about, which is spaces. I think there's a lot of pastors and ministry leaders out there that don't know what to do with their space. It's a huge problem in the church. People feel stuck, and they think it's expensive.
Well, I think they either don't know what to do with it or perhaps are not even seeing it with fresh eyes and don't realize some of the problems. I mean, you and I have popped into so many different churches, and, you know, we notice that there's a tear on the cushion on the pew, or there's dust bunnies in the corner, that kind of stuff. And so I think this is a really eye-opening conversation that the listener is going to enjoy, to hear how you can make really good changes on a very small budget.
Well, welcome to The Glass House. Lynley and I are offsite on a different location with Dave Milam, who is with Visioneering Studios. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Lynley and I are particularly interested in this conversation. We're passionate about spaces.
We're particularly picky about this conversation.
Yes,
that's
we are.
Better.
Overly opinionated, perhaps.
That could be true.
Well, you are a builder's daughter. You've moved in and out of countless homes.
I have.
We designed a church together, the facility. Like, spaces are emotional and powerful in our lives.
Correct.
And as you and I have visited many churches through our short tenure at Lifeway, we do think this is a conversation worth having with pastors about looking at your space and asking the question, what kind of emotional response does this space bring? So Dave, talk a little bit about, you work with churches primarily with visioneering. What are some of the challenges in changing space as pastors realize we've got to update our space? What are the hurdles?
Yeah, what's interesting is a lot of people know intuitively that something's got to change, especially when they're staring down the barrel of this next generation. And they're not attending church, and the boomers and the Gen Xers are trying to figure out, how do we hand this thing off and how do we hand it off well? And so a lot of times it's that level of tension that creates the need for changes. We've got to do something, or this place isn't going to be here, the next 10 to 20 years. We've got to do something to move this thing forward.
Do you fight resistance with that, though? I mean, in regards to, even within those generations, there's a group of people certainly who say, why does it have to change? Why can't we leave it like this?
I mean, we're in some ways, we're like the Undertaker. You only call us when something needs to happen.
Yeah.
So ultimately, when we're on the scene, some of those decisions have been made even before we show up. I'd be curious to know, because you get to travel around to see churches that haven't necessarily made the decision that they need to change. I get to come into a space where they said, this isn't working anymore. I'd be curious to find what you're seeing. And sometimes there's maybe churches that probably need to change, but they don't know they need to change.
Totally. I think the younger generation wants to connect to history. Mm-hmm. I think they love learning about tradition and where the churches come from. So it's not a matter of making it modern, cool, and relevant, but a lot of times it's just being clean. Paying attention to that plant that has dust on it that has been gathering there for weeks and nobody saw it again another week. I mean, Lynley, you talk about the
greenery that has turned turquoise because it's been there so long.
That's right.
Just when you go in places and the big ficus tree has then turned.
The 1980s ficus tree that's in the corner.
I mean, almost like the sun has turned it turquoise, and you're just kind of like, who's not noticing this? Why are we not walking by this and saying, that was really great at one point. Let's update that to a big, new, modern plant. Yeah. I mean, all kinds of things.
Andy Stanley says, time in erodes awareness of. And I think those of us who've been in a church for a really, really long time, it's very, very easy for the people there to even ignore the fact that there's boxes in the corner or there's a little clutter here and there. And sometimes I think the biggest move a church could have is if they just had a garage sale. Like, I don't know how many churches I've been to and they're like, we need more storage. And they walk me through closets and closets of storage. And I'm like, bro, you just need a garage sale. You don't need more storage.
Some of the churches, as we talk about emotions on the show, some of the churches that I drop in, I just feel sad.
In what way?
I feel sad because I genuinely wonder if this stays the same, it's not going to be here in 20 years. And I want it to be here in 20 years. And so there's some little changes they could make, even to the space, the feel of the facility, that might attract some folks that are, checking out God and might pop into their church. And it's the little things that matter. It's intentionality. And that's a word that means a lot to you, Lynley, intentionality. Why is this? Why are you so passionate about that, by the way?
Well, I think people are drawn to intentionality. I mean, I don't like going to events that we sit there and eat the meal for an hour and 15 minutes and no program goes on. But then we sit there for another 2 hours during the program because we couldn't have started it 30 minutes earlier. I mean, those kind of things. And so I just think you can be intentional in programming and you can be intentional in spaces. And so it's hard, I think, when you go through spaces sometimes when we visit, and it's kind of, you just think a very, very minimal changes would go so far. And what's really sad to me is that I think in most church spaces or buildings, you have really talented people in them. And so we don't tap into our congregations and even willing people to say, hey, can we may not have a huge budget, but could we paint? But I do think there are ways that you can tap into really organize people in your churches and spaces and make some updates pretty often.
Yeah, the hopeful thing is I think even for a lot of churches, just a small tweak here or there would really move the needle for them.
Right.
I mean,
and it doesn't take a lot of money.
Yeah, really. Like often when people talk about building projects or we've got to do something with our facility, the dollar signs like kind of deer in headlights. Yeah. You have that moment when really it doesn't have to be expensive to move the needle and even to communicate to the community like, hey, something's different here and we're for you. Here's, I think, the emotional thing. And having been a church planter, I've felt this before. You've probably felt this before. There's a moment in a church plant, and usually in most churches that we know of, where you hit this moment of scarcity, where you don't have enough money. You're not sure whether we're going to be able to pay the staff or not. And so you close in and you contract a little bit. And in those moments, it's tough to say, let's drop some cash on our building. And that I even see churches a lot, and it's tough because there's this PTSD from those moments, and that moment may have happened 10 years ago, but they're still like, but we can't do this because, what if we're there again? And that scarcity mentality really prevents people from taking the kind of risks that they need to take to really reach the community, the kind of risk that Christ took on the cross. That's a big risk.
I love what Dave said when he was talking about churches call him in to help. They're out of storage. And he goes through the space and says what they actually need is a garage sale.
Right.
And I think that's so interesting because every church, whether you're 50 people or 5,000 people, you have very talented church members in there that are willing to help. And I guarantee, even in a church of 50, there's somebody in there that can organize. There's someone in there that can swing a hammer. There's painters. And so I think the thing that we took away from that section is that we don't tap into our congregation enough to update our spaces.
This is a problem as churches get larger. You and I have led a large church and a small church, and we've watched one grow from scratch. As a church gets larger, we tend to professionalize everything. Let's hire it out. Let's go get somebody that can come and clean up this mess. When there's people right there Monday through Friday that would love to be involved with decluttering that closet. And so it's just a matter of looking and finding people who have a passion for it.
I think the most special part of our ministry at Storyline was the moving in process to the new building.
Yep.
And we organized all these different days of building furniture, putting together baby swings,
hanging coat racks.
Yeah,
all that stuff.
Just art wires, everything. And the amount of people that showed up time after time, like Saturday after Saturday, was just incredible. And I feel like that we're missing that in a lot of our churches, of just allowing people to come use their gifts.
I noticed I kept getting sent to the hardware store.
Ben, we're out of hammers.
Why was that? They kept getting me out of the building. I had gifts to offer.
Your gift is the gift of gab, I hear.
Well,
like talking.
Well, you go get this box of screws. Here's the box. Take it to the counter and ask them.
And then when he come back with it, we were like, that's not the right one. You need to go back.
Gift of gab. That's what I bring to the table. So if you're listening and you're not sure what to do, you have a space issue, step one would be identify people in the church who have a gift for this, get them into a room and say, what can we do about it? Mm-hmm. How do we take the next step? God's put people right there in your midst. They can help you make it happen.
To tie this up, at Storyline, the lead designer was one of our friends who has no degree in interior design. She has a great eye for design.
Yeah.
And so we just called her and said, Haley, would you like to lead up this project? And she did. And it was incredible. I mean, so don't overlook the people right around you.
Dave, talk about your personal mission statement. You shared this with me recently, and I think it's brilliant. Say it.
Yeah, my personal mission statement is this. I came up with this years and years ago. It's to awaken beauty in life and environment in places ready for change.
Wait, say that again.
So this is funny. To awaken beauty in life and environment. So there's two places I am intentional about waking beauty. One, it's in somebody's life. When there's dormant beauty, and I'm not talking physical, I'm talking maybe spiritual, where there's something great in them that they're just not capturing. I want to help them awaken that. And even environments, when I walk through a church building or a raw piece of grass, and I see what could be, I help awaken that. That's so important to me. But the key thing for me is the statement that I had at the end of that, where it's, I do it in places ready for change. And I've even had people come up to me and say, why aren't you investing in me? Like, why don't you spend time with me? And honestly, I as caring as I possibly can, I will sometimes say, you're not ready.
You don't want to change.
You don't really want to, because I can invest in you, but I can't want it more for you than you want it. And when I'm working with a church and I see opportunities and possibilities, and man, it's so easy for me to want it more for them than they do.
Yeah.
And I can see where it could go and it could be amazing. But if they're not ready, because it's hard work to make change with your building.
Yes.
To work with elders and deacons who may be change resistant, to deal with that mom whose kids got married at this church or walked down the aisle there. To make those kind of sweeping changes, it's not easy at all. You've got to really want it, and you got to really be willing to walk through that tunnel of chaos to get there.
So how do you identify when they're not ready? Because everybody says, oh, we're ready for change, and then it probably gets really tricky.
The reason that question is so relevant is I think there's some pastors and wives listening that are like, are our people ready? Like, we may want it, but do they want it?
I don't know. I think I've probably got, again, PTSD from investing in places that aren't ready, so I'm hypersensitive to it. But you can typically tell when you... it's almost like, how can I tell when my puppy is hungry? If I throw food out there and he doesn't eat it, he's not hungry. If I throw a couple nuggets of food out there and he gobbles it up, then, I guess he's hungry for something. And metaphorically, I think that can happen, like even with change and ideas. You can see if people are consuming the ideas and are hungry for something, or if they're just like shutting it down if they're shutting it down, they're not ready.
Well, you've come up with a fascinating list of mixed messages that churches send about their spaces. And the reason I want to talk about these is I want ministry leaders, other church leaders, and just honestly, this is for everybody, to ask the question if they've really understood the power of space and the message that it sends.
Well, what's interesting is mixed messages, I think, we live in a society right now where we want one common message, and we want to know that what you're saying is actually true. And that's the person I'm going to follow, and that's the place I want to lean into. And when I get mixed messages, when you say one thing and do something else, there's part of me that wants to back away from that. And I don't trust really what's being said or done when I'm hearing these mixed messages. So I think, honestly, there are churches across the United States, as I've been traveling and working with churches, where they're clearly, this is interesting, clearly sending mixed messages, to the people around them and to even their members.
And I think these are obstacles to growth. I really do, in terms of expanding your reach in the community. So the first one, do you want to read it, Lynley?
Sure. I mean, I think this one's so interesting, having been a kids ministry director, but it says, we care about the next generation, but security is compromised, check-in is challenged, and kids are literally everywhere. And I mean, that is so true. And it's hard. That is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hard thing to manage.
Every church website says we care about kids. I mean, they all do, and they'll stand up front and say it, and they'll put kids up front singing or whatever. But when it comes down to it, and a first-time mom is checking in their kid to a nursery or to the elementary classroom, man, those moms are hyper aware, and they see everything. If there's chaos, and we even talk about. There was a day with kids security where we were worried about somebody picking up your kid and taking them off, but now we're also worried about active shooter situations and how do we guard against that, and how do we protect our kids in case something like that happens. Yeah. All of those things are rolling through a mom's mind as they're dropping off their kid. So
at Storyline, probably our fourth Sunday into launching. So I'm the kids ministry director. We got a child lost. Oh, wow. What happened is that this child, a family was picking up their child, and this little girl walked out with them, and nobody noticed it. And so the family came in to get their child, and she was missing. And I mean, that family, we found her by the front door. I mean, so we caught her and stuff. But that family, I mean, you talk about what makes you take something seriously immediately.
There's meetings afterwards.
Well,
what happened?
And honestly, we just said that they could have ruined us. I mean, in that moment, they could have gotten all over Nextdoor and Facebook and everywhere and say, "Don't you dare send your child to this church," because they lost ours, and they were so gracious with us. But it was a completely 180, and I thought we were monitoring it well. It just happened so fast, and so this to me is particularly important.
Yeah, and what's interesting is we're back to Churchill, right? You were handed a deck of a building, or maybe it was portable.
It was a school. Yeah, it was a portable building.
Yeah, and you had to make it work. Your building shaped the way you did things, and so you just somehow had to make it work and try to mitigate security as best you possibly could. But that's super common to even churches that have been around for 50, 60, 70 years. Because the model of kids' environments then is very different than now.
Absolutely.
And we find churches trying to mitigate that, right? Instead of just saying, this building is just not working for us.
And if you want to love me, you love my kids.
Yeah.
Like, I feel really loved when people take an active interest in my kids. I mean, it cannot be overemphasized how important it is to send the message, we love your kids. And when the check-in is a nightmare every Sunday. Yeah. And why are they not thinking about this?
You said that very passionately.
I
felt energy coming from your voice for some reason.
I don't know. You feel like you're there to connect with people, and you're standing in this line, and you're missing all the opportunities to go out there and have coffee with somebody. Right. And it just feels like it was unintentional. Like nobody's really working during the week on this issue.
Yeah, and we've even worked with churches where the preschool classroom was right next to the public men's restroom, which was like,
oh my gosh.
That's bad.
Oh gosh.
And that's just how it was.
They weren't locked down back behind somewhere.
No. But it was the building telling the church where they needed, this is the only place they had to go. They had to redesign it.
You referenced the Churchill quote. Say it again. Such a great quote.
We shape our buildings thereafter they shape us. That was Winston Churchill.
That's good.
Sir Winston Churchill.
I love that. We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. Wow. All right. Number 2. Let's get on to the second one. We want people to connect, but our facility is transactional.
Oh, my goodness.
That's a big word, transactional. Break that down.
I get extra 50 cents for using that word,
yeah,
I think.
I feel like I'm at the bank.
Yeah. It is transactional. And if you think about how, Willow Creek back in the day did church.
And that was the way to do it.
It really was. And what was interesting is everybody did church that way. And it was almost a conveyor belt style of church. You show up, you do church, we get you out the door. So as a result, they made the building very transactional. We wanted it to be all about you coming to the service and leaving. And even the design of the building was like, we need you to leave because we need your seat and we need your parking space. And so it was designed in a way so that people would leave. Even if you think about Starbucks pre-pandemic, right? If you go to Starbucks, you would notice that they have different kinds of seating at the Starbucks. They've got the hard chairs that you don't want to sit in longer than an hour, but then they've got the soft stuff so that when people come in, there's at least somebody sitting in there. It's not an empty restaurant. And we can allocate how long people sit based on how many outlets we put and where we put them, and what kind of seating we have. That becomes kind of this both. We want transactional, but we want whatever. But the newer style of design is very community focused.
So there's a lot more places to sit down, to lock eyes, to enjoy a conversation.
Yeah. Our CEO is a former Disney Imagineer, and he literally built Soarin' Over California, Grizzly Rapids. Like, he built those. There's awards in our office that he won for that. And what's really cool is every once in a while I'll sit down to lunch with him, and I remember one lunch, we're just eating, and he says, "Hey, you know why we built California Adventure?" And he says, "Well, what's interesting is the Disney execs at the time asked the question, how long is the average length of stay for the guest?" And they did the math and they did the studies, and they figured that the average length of stay for the guest was 0.7 of a day. And so the business team got back to work, and they said, you know what, we want the average length of stay to be 1.2 of a day. And here's how much money you can spend, and it'll pencil if you can do that. So they built California Adventure on the parking lot of Disney. And some would say that was the worst theme park that was ever made. But then they added Disney hotels and downtown Disney, and before you know it, they were booking 1.7 of a day, which, if you're Disney, means you're making more money. Like, if I can get you to stay longer, then the chances that you're going to spend more money is higher. It's why IKEA serves meatballs, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you stay longer, you spend more money. But if I looked at an average church service and I said, let's imagine the church service was an average of like an hour long, and the average length of stay for the guest was an hour and 5 minutes. I know a lot about that stay.
That's good.
I know that they came in, they've checked out their kids, they went straight to the car, right? But if I can get the average length of stay to be an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and 20, and not because I'm holding them hostage in the check-in or in the parking lot, but because genuinely they stopped and talked to people, then that's how you build community.
Yeah.
And I can get people in people's houses way easier after they've connected in the hallways than this, go to some stranger's house because there's a house group there,
That's really good.
Mm-hmm.
When we built our church, the thing I loved about it was the massive lobby.
Giant.
Because we wanted to send the message like, hey, come early, get coffee, stay late, hang with people. We don't want you out of here. And I think it really sends a message like we want people to connect here and have community. And what you're saying is true. A lot of church buildings the lobby is like restaurants. Like, I don't even know where to stand here. Like, it's tiny.
Yeah. Well, and there are probably some church pastors who are listening to this that say, we don't have the money to build this big, massive lobby that you're talking about. Thanks for the advice. I appreciate it. But what we're doing a lot of is you can create great indoor-outdoor space. And it's possible that maybe you can't expand your lobby, but you can create an amazing front porch or an amazing back porch that the community sees. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to construction dollars, those spaces are pennies on the dollar, easy.
This third one is right in Lynley's wheelhouse.
We long to engage our community, but our site signals that we're siloed, inwardly focused, or even dead.
She loves community. Like, church for her is always, how do we reach the community? How do we send a message we're here for them? This is not just a holy huddle.
Yeah.
And architecture and design of buildings, it does say something.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the greatest compliment to any space would be that your community likes to come into your building.
Right.
I mean, instead of saying, I don't want to come in there, like, it scares me, the thought of it.
Like, if they were just even having like a homeowners association meeting, they would say, let's have it down at this church. It's like a beautiful space.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so maybe
they're
not
accommodating, and they've thought through all these things.
It really is a form of hospitality. Like, does our space scream hospitality? We'd love for people to come over and hang out with us.
Or do we even include them? I mean, what you're saying here is, are we siloed, inwardly focused? We all say, love God, love people, serve the world. I mean, that's basically every church's slogan. And I think if that's true, are we really loving people if we're not offering our space for anything?
Yeah.
And if we are offering it, it's very expensive rental or different things like that. So, I mean, that's what's hard.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing when we're working with churches across the nation is, I think probably in the past 5 years or so, the largest auditorium we built was like 3,500, and then it was probably like 2 or 3 of those, And so most auditoriums, unless it's a special situation, are landing anywhere from 12 to 1,500. But those churches who are about 20 to 30 years old, they started really thriving in the Willow Creek era. So a lot of them have bought 40 acres of land. Mm-hmm. The church was plopped in the middle of this property, and there's this moat of just land all around them that separates them from the community. And they've got this plot where the 6,000 seater was supposed to go. And you talk to the pastor now, and they're like, bro, we're never going to do that, ever. And they're going to do campuses, they're going to launch churches, but we're never going to do the 6,000 seater. And so now it creates this unique problem. Like, we literally have siloed ourselves in the community. Like, visually, there's this there's acres of land protecting us.
It kind of screams no trespassing.
It kind of does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some have tried to mitigate it, saying we're going to throw a baseball diamond out there and, bring the community in. But it doesn't create a density to the property that makes the property trafficked 7 days a week, And a lot of times the church can we're seeing this a ton. The church can leverage that property to do a couple of things, to activate their property 7 days a week. They can leverage that property to lengthen the guest stay, by maybe even leasing it out to some local restaurants or stuff like that, so that when people leave, they're almost eating on the church property. It's super cool. Like,
get creative. Church
picnic every Sunday. Yeah. And then they can also create an additional revenue stream for the church. I mean, that starts to signal to the community, not only do we want you here, but we're going to be incarnate in the community with you.
So let's say that there's pastors out there, wives, they're listening, they're thinking, how do we change our church property? I think it does send the message that we're siloed, that we don't care about the community. Mm-hmm. What are some little things you guys even coach churches to do that would maybe change that message a little? Some baby steps.
Yeah, I think one is definitely the front porch. One of the modules that we typically do with churches is we will really try our best to have them look at their building for the first time again, if we possibly can. And sometimes when you do that, you start to really notice, oh, I didn't notice that. You start to really see maybe the things that need to be changed. And sometimes it can be simple. Often you can't see your way out of the box on that one.
Yeah.
And we've seen churches call other pastors to get their impression. Often they call us and just say, hey, will you take a look at our building and tell us what you think? And we tell them what we think.
They need outside eyes.
Yeah.
So don't try to fix this problem yourself. Get some experts who really know what they're doing.
Right.
Who can walk through the space and give you some objective feedback.
Right.
Before you go blow a bunch of money.
Yeah, and sometimes even if it's a small church with no budget, sometimes you can even reach out to the interior design student who needs a project, and get some ideas at least.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Number 4, we want guests to feel comfortable, but our facility is impossible to navigate. Why is it hard to navigate?
Well, because it's been built like a hospital. It's usually a church with somebody goes, you know what, we should put a building over there, and they put a building, and they're like, you know what, we need an education wing. We put a building over there, and before you know it, it's
piecemeal.
My goodness, where are we going? And we usually get these phone calls when they want help with wayfinding, like creating the signs. And if you need more than 3 or 4 arrows on your sign, then you don't have a wayfinding problem. You have a building design problem.
Yeah.
But
a lot of pastors are stuck with what they got. Maybe they just came to the church. It is a piecemeal design. They just kept adding on section after section.
We had that at
our first church was that way. The church was not affluent. It was landlocked. They kept just kind of adding on another wing, and before you know it, it was the longest hallway in Christendom. But what do you do in that moment?
Hallway.
I guess you do try to use signage, maximize signage.
Sure. Yeah, graphics and signage can do a lot, but ultimately, if it's a design problem, you just still have a design problem with lipstick on the pig.
It does seem like the best way to mitigate that is to have live volunteers who are happy people that can point the way.
Yes.
Yes.
Because
signs, just no matter how good they are, they don't get you all the way there.
Yes, and the other thing that's an easy win sometimes is really clear defined portals. You know what I say when I say portal?
Oh, so I'm walking now into this space.
Yeah, almost like when you drive into the Target parking lot, there's this I don't even know how long, 250-foot long building, right? You get out of your parking lot, you look at the building, and there's this big red portal. Like your brain doesn't even engage. Where am I supposed to go here? I don't know where I'm supposed to go.
You can tell.
You just like the target, the big red target. There it is. And sometimes you can do that with the framing of your kid's environment or even the framing of your front door. And if it's big enough, and I don't want to say loud enough, but big enough that people can see that, they self-navigate sometimes.
You're right. Large churches, sometimes it looks like a long, flat floor plan, and you're like, where do I go in?
And you're in the parking lot, and you don't even know where to go.
So the fifth one says, we are relevant, yet our building is out of date.
Who defines what is out of date?
I'm going to get in so much trouble. Like if you sit in a men's eldership meeting and say, is our building out of date? And everybody's a baby boomer, they're going to say no. But if you go to the younger generation or you talk to the ladies, they will tell you.
I think there is an idea sometimes in generations of why do we have to do it the way the young people want it? We built this place.
Yeah.
Why does it have to be about them?
Yeah. And honestly, good design can thread that needle.
Talk about that.
Yeah, good design can thread the needle and make it an intergenerational design. It doesn't have to throw out one or the other. There are times when we've even worked with churches where they've said, we are going to live by pews and we're going to do pews till we die. And we challenged it and they weren't for it. And then when we installed the right kind of seating, it was like, oh, this actually feels like pews a little bit, but it's not. And it can be done really, really thoughtfully and honoring in an honoring kind of a way. And the people that I have seen that have done this the best, it has nothing to do with design. It has everything to do with the leader's ability to honor that generation through the course of change.
And there's ways to do it tastefully without making it feel like it's a museum.
Yeah.
Or without feeling like it's like the newest store in the mall.
Yeah, I know one pastor in Columbus, Ohio, he was a church planter and he was gifted a church building. And with that church building were 30 or 40 members. And he could have easily just said, I'm going to do what I want to. But instead, he chose the course of honoring every one of literally he told the story of every one of those 30 members to his people, brought them up on stage, prayed for them, honored them, and made them the heroes of the entire thing. And they're still serving. They're legendary in the church. And so over the course of change, if it's done in a way that doesn't honor the past, then you're going to have people that fight it. But if it can be done in a way that really honors, like people sold their boats and land and sacrificed and didn't go to Disney just so they could have the building that now you're going to tear down.
Right.
And
huge moments in their lives took place in those spaces.
Absolutely.
And we can't, ignore that.
Yeah.
Talk about the work it takes to change space, because as Dave says so well, you have to walk through a tunnel of chaos to get there. People have a hard time changing out spaces because they have emotional reactions.
Yeah. He just talked about people being change resistant and how spaces evoke so much emotion, and the aisle that you're about to change, the carpet in the aisle that you're about to change is the one their daughter walked down the aisle to. And how dare you change that kind of thing?
Right. We've talked about this with the church we got married in.
Yeah, the church we got married in, about 2 weeks later, they bulldozed it.
Yeah.
They had bought some different land, and the whole thing, a giant building is gone. And I guess for me, I don't understand it because we have the pictures, we have the memories, and so I don't need an actual building to make that important.
And I know why they did it. They came to our wedding and saw that's the height of perfection.
Right.
Those two people, so let's just knock it down. Only goes down from here.
I'm sure that was it. They had no plans before that to knock it down.
So I have compassion for pastors and wives who realize the space needs to be updated but don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or, take away memories. But at the same time, as they're trying to reach the next generation, this stuff matters. It's one piece of the puzzle and how we reach new families.
This stuff being spaces, correct?
Yeah, in the way they look, the way people feel when they walk into a space, into a room. These things matter in reaching people. Dave, I've heard you tell a story about what your family does or used to do in shopping for where you're going to eat. That is so relevant to this discussion. Tell that.
It's so funny. I I've got 4 kids, and back in the day when we had like 3 of them in car seats, right? And we would go on vacation. We always like to eat local. And you'll eat Chick-fil-A 10 times on the trip anyway, but when we would go to a local place, the way it would work with our families, we pull up the minivan, and it's commitment to unload all the car seats and go in. Once you've done that, it doesn't matter what the environment's like, you're going to stay. But so we came up with a strategy. What we do is we pull the minivan up to the front, and we would send out one representative to the restaurant. And that representative would go in, and if you were that representative, this is how it went down. You would actually do a 3-second scan of the space. And in that 3-second scan, you would determine what the entire experience will be like. You would determine whether you want to stay there or not, or if that's where you wanted to spend the next hour of your life. And after you checked that box, I mean, there were times when I did the scan and just walked out because I was like, no, not today, But there were other times when I did the scan, I was like, oh, it's okay. And then you ask for a menu. And you're only asking for a menu because you'd want to make sure it's not $50 a plate, because you can find the chicken nuggets or the salad or the hamburger. Everybody's got it. So we can make this work. But it was that 3-second scan that really determined whether I was going to stay or not. And it's interesting. I've never done this, but I wonder if there are people who do that same dance with the church on Sunday morning. The kids are in the minivan, we're going to go to the next church. I don't know if they do or not.
Absolutely. And I think even more than that, because we've talked about how culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's Peter Drucker. But, churches have all these strategies for reaching people, and they have all these processes to go out and share the gospel and reach people. But they maybe have never asked the question of what's it like to invite somebody into this space?
Yeah.
And how many of our church members would, if they're honest, not be comfortable inviting their unchurched neighbor into that building?
Right.
Because it just screams a message they don't want to send to their neighbor. So for that reason, this conversation about space is more about it's more important than just decor or taste or preference. It has everything to do with relevance,
right,
in reaching a community,
right. And I really think as we even discuss all of the stuff that we're talking about with design and space and what could happen, every pastor, no matter where you are, can do something. Right? It may be as simple as, we're going to do a walkthrough and we're going to clear the clutter. Because there's a lot of clutter everywhere, and we're going to take the welcome desk, and there's 10,000 brochures, but we've got a website. Let's clear some of the clutter. Maybe that's just the very first step in moving the needle. Maybe it's a fresh coat of paint. Maybe it's we're going to buy a couple patio chairs and set them out front with maybe an umbrella or two. And or it could be a $10 million project. It could be that level. Yeah. But there is a step forward to move the needle. You can definitely do that.
Well, Visioneering Studios has been a preferred partner with Lifeway, and for years now we've been sending, when churches call us saying, we have this problem, we send them to you and say, hey, help this church figure this out, because more and more churches, I think particularly kind of where we are in this generation in architecture, buildings are needing to be turned and changed and updated, and this is a major problem for a lot of church leaders and for, honestly, just a lot of families. And space matters.
Yeah, I think it's a major opportunity too, not just a problem. It's like, there's a lot of headroom here, and these type of changes, even if they're small changes, can make a huge difference in culture. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the pastor out there who, and maybe he and his wife are listening to this, they know their building is in bad shape. They're discouraged. This episode has not been helpful. It only condemns them.
No.
What would you say to them? Like, Dave, help me. Like, what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's a lot of hope there. Usually that sense of desperation and hopelessness comes from the spot of not knowing what to do or how to move forward, And I would say probably 90 to 95% of the churches that we talk to can move forward. They just don't know how to do it. Because when we went to seminary, nobody talked about this. Nobody said, here's how you do a building plan, here's how you do architecture, here's how architects come in, or loans or rates, and nobody talked about that. I mean, we're going solo without a net on this one. And sometimes when we step forward, we feel like we're betting the farm on something we've never done and we don't know anything about. You ask me about Genesis, I'll tell you. Ask me about building, I don't have a clue. And so often it really comes down to just having somebody help guide you through.
Yeah.
You know, and most of the churches we talk to can move the needle.
I think every pastor wants to be like Nehemiah. He had a burden to build the wall, and he knew exactly how to do it. He knew what supplies he needed. Like, everybody wants to be that kind of leader. Hey, church, this is what we need to do, and I've already drawn it up. I think in humility,
Nehemiah had somebody else paying for it, though, too.
He did have a funding agent. Yeah. I think it's important for pastors to realize, I have the burden and the passion, but I have the vision. I could use some help trying to sort out the space thing.
Yeah, the company I work for is called Visioneering Studios. I don't know if you got that.
And there are others like yours, but there are specialists that can come alongside your church and help you sort that mess out, because you're already covered up on pastoral care and the sermon and all that stuff. So be encouraged. There's hope out there.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you consider leaving us a rating or a review wherever you listen to the show? It gives us insight into what you like, and it helps others find the show as well. The Glass House is hosted by Lifeway, produced and edited by Angie Elkins Media, original music by Robert Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, and artwork by Cameron Spooner.